So last time I was talking about free and direct discourse in Jane Austen, and the the formal complexity of Austen's narrative, the way in which she brings multiple perspectives simultaneously to bear in the narration, so that in that first line of Pride and Prejudice, we hear a statement that would be, it's the kind of thing that would be made in earnest by Mrs. Bennet. She's the one that would think that a eligible bachelor, wealthy bachelor, is in want of a wife. That doesn't, she wouldn't necessarily say it out loud like that, though. It betrays a kind of intelligence, a mocking, satirizing awareness of Mrs. Bennet's closed-mindedness, aligned with a more sophisticated perspective like Elizabeth's. I want to explore more in depth now um, the formal issues in Austen's narrative style. Um, and I think a way of framing this that is really apt refers to Burke's idea of the power of property and tradition. This is really what's at stake in Darcy's pride. Um, the attitude that doesn't need to defend itself, an attitude of entitlement, doesn't need to speak for itself. Um, Versus, on the other hand, the prejudice of social envy and resentment and rivalry. So, a good example of this comes early in the book, in chapter 3. Look at the various ways in which what it means to be a gentleman. So again, the question of an eligible bachelor, the various ways in which being a gentleman is characterized. I love this word gentleman-like, which implies a kind of performative identity. What it means to be a gentleman is to be gentleman-like. It's always embodied somehow in a particular behavior, and that's what Austen's narrative is exploring. It's analyzing very acutely subtle distinctions in different kinds of behavior, and how they're evaluated socially. Mr. Bingley was good-looking and gentlemanlike. He had a pleasant countenance and easy, unaffected manners. His sisters were fine women with an air of decided fashion. His brother-in-law, Mr. Hurst, merely looked the gentleman. So he's gentlemanlike. He's authentically like a gentleman. He has the authentic appearance of a gentleman. Again, the complexity of this kind of social judgment. Mr. Hurst had the inauthentic appearance of a gentleman, merely looked the gentleman. But his friend, Mr. Darcy, soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report which was in general circulation within 5 minutes of his entrance, of his having 10,000 a year. So this is, in a nutshell, the essential tension in Jane Austen. The prestige, the valid pride, the nobility, embodied by noblemen like Darcy, is uh, sacred to Austen, and uh, under threat, yeah, importantly under threat by its correlation with money. So Austen, like Edmund Burke, is very concerned with the nouveau riche who can buy their way into nobility. She's she understands, like Burke, that putting a price tag on the sacred embodied property of the distinct um, bloodlines, heritage, the land of British nobility. Um, the distinctness of that identity is under threat by being liquidated in the terms of capitalism, capitalists getting and spending, to quote Wordsworth's sonnet, which we'll look at in a second. Um, that's the tension that's registered here. The unmistakable, remember that it's the same tension as in Wordsworth, I wandered lonely as a cloud. 10,000 saw I at a glance. At a glance, there's something unmistakably noble about Darcy, that's embodied, it's a aura, an enchantment embodied in him. But that's in tension with this new modern spirit of calculation, the Protestant work ethic, and capitalism, consumer capitalism. General circulation within 5 minutes, 10,000 a year. All this calculation, rates of circulation. So Darcy's nobility is unmistakable at a glance, and yet this social judgment is in a second inverted to exactly the opposite. Instead of an object of veneration, he becomes, in this middle class setting, his pride becomes offensive and threatening, and within a second he was discovered to be proud to be above his company and above being pleased, and not all his large estate could then save him from having a most forbidding, disagreeable countenance and being unworthy to be compared with his friend. Was the fickleness of the crowd at the ball and the response to Darcy. One minute he's the finest gentleman in the room. The next minute he's a total jerk. That it's an unmoored society. That this new commercial getting and spending society has lost its anchor in kind of aesthetic appreciation. So there's a overlap then with Wordsworth that I think's important to it. It's worth looking out, looking back at this poem for how Wordsworth explores this poetically, acts it out in his language, going back to the question of formal expression. So, what do you notice about the form of Wordsworth's lines here? What strikes you? What is odd about it? The world is too much with us. It formally acts out the meaningful content of what it's saying. The syntax itself is crammed, is too much. The world is too much with us. Um, the world is too much with us. It's too much with us. It's unclear. It's kind of too crammed together. Too much with us late and soon. It's like he's piling on. It's happening too fast. The words aren't properly art. The ideas aren't properly articulated. Um, Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Um, there's, like in Austin, a focus on rhythm, that things have gotten too fast or circulating too fast and have lost their orientation. We can't hold on to them. Our perception, our perspective has become self-undermining. Our own activity undermines us. A sordid boon. We've capitalized on the world, but that has a boon. We've gotten some kind of reward, but only by making it all sordid, by ruining it, corrupting it. Uh, he gives us metaphors like it, it personifies the ocean, bears her bosom to the moon. The winds that will be howling at all hours personifies the winds and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. So he offers us these anthropomorphisms, this appropriations of nature. So these seeming to suggest a kind of purchase on nature, nature that is ours, but then he takes away what these metaphors seem to promise. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. Powerful statement within a poem. What's a poem if not the music of making language musical? This is a poem about being out of tune. We're out of tune. I'm writing a poem about being out of tune with itself, with its own metaphors. We can't read what I'm saying. And in a way, Austen's doing the same thing, you know? She's saying, what does it mean? Like, she writes about a fine, tall person, noble, mean. So she gives the reader this image of nobility, but then takes it away. She is describing a situation in which the proper gravity, that's a key term for Burke and for Austen, gravity, the weight, the inertia, the sluggishness of the English national character has dissolved into this mechanical, ceaseless activity of getting and spending. It moves us not. So we are moving it to a different rhythm. This crammed, accelerated getting and spending. We've lost an older kind of movement that responds to the gravity of nature, the seasons, the power of the aesthetic beauty of the land, the sea, and so on. And he curses, great God, I'd rather be a pagan, suckled in a creed outworn, sort of disowns it disowns the his own culture. That disowns the present, um, and um, what another. So we see this. He's acting out in his distorted syntax, his disavowed metaphors. He's acting out this crisis of cultural value, modern crisis of value, social value. Um, and does it also in this vain, impotent statement of preference. I'd rather be a pagan. Like what he is exemplifying the problem that he's complaining about. This idle, pointless individual preference. Um, he's making his undermining his own words even more powerfully. But so might I. He said this is a total idle fantasy. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe in the images that he's evoking here. Um, Another powerful example, I think. This is such a unique Wordsworth poem because it's so bitter, but he's using his a technique we've looked at before of negativity. He's showing us images that are negative images, in that he's giving us the image of the personified sea and winds and flowers, but then taking them away and saying no, they're not adequate. These aren't valid metaphors. Um, I'm speaking about a creed outworn. I'm pretending to be able to say something about a creed outworn. Um, so it's a poetry, a very proto-modernist poetry of hollowed out language, bankrupt metaphors. The poetics is in what's absent, what his poem is taking away, making us feel the lack of. It's a poetics of haunting. We're haunted by what's not there. Value, how social value is communicated, registered in aesthetic experience, sensuous experience. How that's, what I was talking about when I gave you that overview, sort of art historical overview. What are the different social values that are expressed through the sensuous experience of art? And I wanted to look at this ad that I had you showed you last week. Examine it and tell you a little bit what I have in mind. So I really feel like it tells us a lot about what Wordsworth's getting at in a poem like "Getting the World's Too Much with Us," as well as what Austen is exploring. So image of, I mean, it's remarkable, Apple, it's about, the iPhone, but it's an ad with a poem, and it's a very Wordsworthian poem, isn't it? This use of impersonal pronouns, this is it. The indexical pronouns, we'll see this more in Tintern Abbott. A pronoun like this, it implicates the reader in an unspecified experience. It makes us draw. It uses, like Wordsworth, minimalism to spark the reader's imagination to imagine a sensuous experience. This is it. What? This is what matters. It's evoking matter, the experience of a product, how it makes someone feel, when you start by imagining what that might be like, you step back, you think. Um, so it's the romantic moment, drawing us into the sort of sublimity of exercising our own perspective, seeing for ourselves. Um, the uh, we spend a lot of time on a few great things until every idea we touch enhances each life it touches. It's so this romantic um, coordination of touch, and imagination. Um, the image here, what strikes you about it? Um, there are a couple other images in the same campaign. Um, I think, minimalist, sensuous, again, super aesthetic. Like this mist is a key theme. Um, Romance, it seems to be targeted towards male audience insofar as it's like, we have a couple here, um, uh, just a, guy working out here. Um, Sort of implied romantic, this is an intimate moment of uh, getting your picture taken. Um, if not, putting the reader in a male perspective, putting the reader in a very romantic setting. Um, it's also nostalgic, romantically nostalgic. This old car, these old trimmings. It's very sensuous, I would say. The wind, blowing, the leather, constructing a sense of self, inviting us to identify with being seen through this device, reconstructing ourselves through imagining the feel of this device, um, and finding our individuality. Every idea we touch enhances every life it touches. Just like Wordsworth, it's about me, it's about finding my distinctness. Um, and that's uh, that's what Apple offers. That's what's being offered or sold, in this ad. Is there a subtext here? What kind of critical questions um, might you raise um, about this? What seems to be um, uh, left out or marginalized? Some powerful language in here. Does this deserve to exist? What kind of question is that to ask? Um, uh, if you're busy making everything, how can you perfect anything? Um, these evocations of busyness, making everything doesn't deserve to exist because it lacks the individuality, the appreciation of the moment that's celebrated in the ad. I think what's at stake there is um, has to do with what is elided here. What do you always read next when you read these words designed by Apple in California, um, assembled in China, right? Um, so, and that's what's silenced. That's what we don't see. Doesn't deserve to exist. Um, So this there's a I think powerful subtext of disowning the in impersonal mass industry that Apple products also depend on, the assembly line um, that is every Apple product depends on is precisely what's disowned here in order to prop up the dream. What there's a racial aspect to that, I think. What it is precisely and specifically Chinese assembly that's getting elided, whose right to exist is getting questioned um, in a very troubling way. Um, and mass industrial life in general. I mean, holy moly, who gets to drive a sweet vintage car like this? Um, all this sensuous experience that's evoked in these ads, and beauty and nature. Um, uh, are all offered at the cost of ignoring the actual impersonal, um, making everything that it, characterizes actual modern life, not just of the Chinese, but of everybody. We're all part of this mass consumer culture. Um, so the ad really implicates us in a kind of self denial, self um, re- repudiation. Um, and that's a virtue, I think, of that's what Wordsworth is doing. What Wordsworth is doing, by contrast, is drawing our attention to this conflict in our worlds, um, rather than trying to mask it. Um, this ad is giving us the metaphors, the personification of nature, the sort of erotic, romantic appeal, um, and saying you can buy it, just get the phone. This can all be yours. You can escape your the actual modern reality. Wordsworth saying no, that's a lie, and acting out that lie, and that acting out is he's communicating a new kind of self-awareness, being haunted. um, I think this um, negative poetics and negative aesthetics, I think Hamlet is sort of an iconic um, representative of it. I can't believe in the king anymore. I can't believe in royalty, but I re-experience. I can't. I'm re articulating um, what used to be royalty in terms of a feeling being haunted by it, um, uh, being haunted, being haunted by the play. The conscience. The play's the thing that'll catch the conscience of the king. The poem, does it catch your conscience? Do you see yourself? Do you see your own contradictions in the poem? Um, Austin's text represent, and communicate this conflicted self consciousness of modernity that uh, pretends to revere nobility and the experience of love, um, even while that's under a, a threat by the terms of our own language, the means of our existence, all those ways in which we circulate, mediate, transport, and communicate, get and spend, um, buy and sell. Um, Well, Wordsworth writes a poem, "The World's Too Much with Us," about being out of tune, a poem about kind of in poetic impotence, being unable to experience poetry. Um, and I think, or an inability to experience music, being out of tune. I think that's a big part, a great way of looking at Pride and Prejudice. A big theme motif of the novel is are dances, social dances, and a kind of collapse or um, tension, static within the dance of social life, of romance, um, violence and pain and miscommunication, um, being out of tune, dissonance, um, uh, disrupt the dance. Um, and this is very self-referential, the novel. Notice all the references to literature. It's often very funny. Um, there's great scenes of Elizabeth and the Bingley sisters trying to read, and Bingley, Austen writes, walks towards the table where a few books were lying. He immediately offered to fetch her others, all that his library afforded. And I wish my collection were larger for your benefit and my own credit, but I'm an idle fellow. And though I have not many, I have more than I ever looked into. Elizabeth assured him that she could suit herself perfectly with those in the room. I'm astonished, said Miss Bingley, that my father should have left so small a collection of books. What a delightful library you have at Pemberley, Mr. Darcy. It ought to be good, he replied. It's been the work of many generations. And then you can have added so much to it yourself. You're always buying books. It cannot comprehend the neglect of a family library in days such as these. Neglect. I'm sure you neglect nothing that can add to the beauties of that noble place. Charles, when you build your house, I wish it be half as delightful as Pemberley. I wish it may. But I would really advise you to make your purchase in that neighborhood and take Pemberley for a kind of model. There's not a finer county in England than Derbyshire. With all my heart, I will buy Pemberley itself if Darcy will sell it. I'm talking of possibilities, Charles. Upon my word, Caroline, I should think it more possible to get Pemberley by purchase than by imitation. So they're talking about library not as like literature, but as furniture. Um, and it not as something to emulate, to imitate, nobility to imitate, but to buy. Um, so, like Wordsworth, a very cynical view of literature, the literature that we're reading. She's mocking these Philistines. The narrator is sharing a laugh at this lack of appreciation for literature, because after all, we're actually reading this. We know how to read. We know that literature is to be read, not to be looked at on the wall. This is very beautifully correlated with needlework, the what it means to actually experience literature, the art of a craft of writing, like the art of music or dancing. Again, I really hope you watch I'd really encourage you to watch the BBC Pride and Prejudice. It's so excellent and faithful and full of wonderfully wonderful interpretations of the novel. And it begins with this great the opening credits have this great images of knitting, needlework, And I think that's a powerful image of the kind of uh, formal music that is getting neglected in the social life portrayed in the novel, in a scene like this in chapter 10 too. Um, Elizabeth took up some needlework and was sufficiently amused in attending to what passed between Darcy and his companion. The perpetual commendations of the lady, either on his handwriting or the evenness of his lines, or on the length of his letter, the perfect unconcern with which her praises were received, formed a curious dialogue, was exactly in union with her opinion of each. So here we get Darcy's cold sluggishness, his indifference, like I don't need to defend myself, on the one hand, and his embodied nobility doesn't need to. It speaks. His body speaks for itself. He doesn't need to. His value is all implicit, embodied. He doesn't need to explicitly uh, advertise or defend himself. The shallowness of uh, the Bingley sisters overlaps with even though um, there's they look down on the crowd at the ball as middle class. Remember, they also are they're the nouveau riche. They show that in their shallowness here towards writing. Um, she doesn't understand that it's a means of communication. She thinks it's just kind of a ornate art object that he's like with this fine handwriting. How delighted Miss Darcy will be to receive such a letter. He made no answer. That's Darcy's typical move, his silence. Um, eh, you write uncommonly fast. You are mistaken. I write rather slowly. How many letters you must have occasion to write in the course of a year! Letters of business, too. How odious I should think them. It's fortunate, then, that they fall to my lot instead of yours. Sort of ironic dismissal, akin to the way Mr. Bennet is always kind of mockingly dismissing Miss Bennet. Pray tell your sister that I long to see her. I've already told her so once by your desire. Inane repetition, um, mechanical chatter, which is also like the Bennets. Um, I'm afraid you don't like your pen. Let me mend it for you. I mend pens remarkably well. Thank you, but I always mend my own. How can you contrive to write so even? He was silent. Um, Tell your sister I'm delighted to hear of her improvement on the harp. This, and again, inane chatter. Pray let her know that I am quite in raptures with her beautiful little design for a table, and I think it infinitely superior to Miss Grantley's. Will you give me leave to defer your raptures till I write again? At present, I have not room to do them justice. Again, mocking them in ways they might not even grasp. It's of no consequence. So Darcy, his silence, his mockery is kind of self-contained, implicit. He doesn't need to spell it out. So again, it's a rule with me that a person who can write a long letter with ease cannot write ill. So writing is like penmanship, inanity of the communication, the fickleness. It's just chatter, mechanical chatter. And she exemplifies this by going back to Bingley's fickleness. Bingley, I mean, the very name just evokes flightiness. So, "Oh," cried Miss Bingley, "Charles writes in the most careless way imaginable. He leaves out half of his words and blots the rest." So his, again, writing, the style of writing, um, his carelessness, getting and spending, inane. Um, uh, what's it? There's a concern for the experience of reading and what, or the attention we pay to the actual text that we're reading. Um, uh, so, um, what does it mean to um, pay attention to language? What does Austin contrast this with? What's the aesthetic value of language? How does that work? Um, I think it starts to get suggested here in this argument where Bingley's kind of uh, he is accused by Darcy of pride, both in his fickleness, flightiness, like he brags about, I saw the house for 2 minutes and then I bought it. And he's bragging about his poor writing. You're really proud of your defects of writing. And so again, it's a misplaced pride that she's pointing out. Um, he he's exhibiting this consumerist power, this power of getting and spending, that it's part, extolled by modern culture. This uh, um, insatiable desire for new, unique experiences and identities that I can claim by buying. So that's what Bingley, it's like Bling, his name. Uh, you consider them your defects in writing from a rapidity of thought and carelessness of execution, which, if not estimable, you think at least highly interesting. The power of doing anything with quickness is always prized much by the possessor, and often without any attention to the imperfection of the performance. When you told Miss Bennet this morning that if you ever resolved on quitting Netherfield, you should be done in 5 minutes, you meant it to be a sort of panegyric, a compliment to yourself. And yet, what is there so very laudable in a precipitance which must leave very necessary business undone, and can be of no real advantage to yourself or anyone else? Bingley's response is funny. This is too much. To remember at night all the foolish things that were said in the morning. So his complaint his objection confirms Darcy's point. Like, you can't hold me responsible for what I said back then. Like, that he's exhibiting the flightiness, precipitance, inconsistency that Darcy's describing. He's defending himself by exhibiting exactly what he's being charged of. Elizabeth intervenes here in an interesting way by evoking that gravity of friendship. So Darcy says, Darcy says to Bingley, you just do whatever the last person told you to do. If a friend were to say, Bingley, you had better stay till next week, you'd probably do it. You'd probably not go. And at another words, might stay a month. And so Elizabeth raises the question of friendship. And I think is a key, it's a key romantic value, friendship. A friend is a self-created category, like gentlemanlike. If you're gentleman-like, you're just um, embodying the what it means to be a gentleman by the way you act it out. You're defining what it means to be a gentleman by being gentleman-like. Um, Friendship is similarly open-ended social value or social norm of social relationship. Unlike um, inherited institutional social relationships, identities, family, the hierarchical family relationships and patriarchy that are so, crucial in structuring this plot, where the female offspring are all disinherited. Um, Friendship is a self-created social norm and value and a meaningful kind of social institution. Um, and it's also not commodified like a relationship of property the way marriage is. Um, so I just want to highlight that term, the importance of friendship. Um, Also, the term persuasion is very key. Um, because she has a whole novel called that, but also because that's what's at stake in literature: rhetoric, persuasion, the power of language to influence social reality. So you appear to me, Mr. Darcy, to allow nothing for the influence of friendship and affection. A regard for the requester would often make one readily yield to a request without waiting for arguments to reason one into it. So that's what an implicit social value is. You don't need to wait for arguments to get explicit arguments to get reasoned into it. In general and ordinary cases between friend and friend, where one of them is desired by the other to change a resolution of no very great moment, should you think it ill of that person for complying with the desire? Will it not be advisable before we proceed on the subject to arrange with rather more precision the degree of importance which is to appertain to this request, as well as the degree of intimacy subsisting between the parties? Um, so he wants like more contextual information. What kind of friends are we talking about? And Bingley's reply is one of the more, I think, important characterizations of Darcy in the whole novel. Um, Let us hear all the particulars, and not what's explicitly, overtly stated, but the unstated, implicit details of this situation are what matter, are what are at stake in friendship and social interactions in general. Um, Let us hear all the particulars, not forgetting their comparative height and size, for that will have more weight in the argument, Miss Bennet, than you may be aware of. I assure you that if Darcy were not such a great tall fellow in comparison with myself, I should not pay him half so much deference. I declare I do not know a more awful object than Darcy on particular occasions and in particular places, at his own house especially, and of a Sunday evening when he has nothing to do. That's really poetic, if you read it. It can kind of Wordsworthian. It's like, this is it. She's particular occasions, particular places. She's just withdrawing any kind of explicit characterization of value and just situating us relative to, in relationship to a body, in relationship to the power of embodied value, the, you know, the Darcy's body that doesn't need to speak for itself. It's really crucial subtext of this novel is a relationship of bodies, the implicit embodied stakes and consequences, ramifications for bodies of what's being explicitly said in the novel. I'll go into more detail on that next.